When I think of self-care, the word control comes to mind. Today, I'm going to share my best self-care tip. Let go of control. If you stick around, I'll reveal the secret on how I do that in my own life. If you've been following me, you know I pursue 5 paths that lead to a good life. We're focusing today on the path practice self-care. What I mean by self-care is when we make conscious, deliberate choices to look after our well-being, and that includes good mental, physical, and spiritual health. When we have high life satisfaction and a sense of purpose. It's when we have the ability to manage our thoughts and emotions. Now notice I didn't say control your thoughts and emotions, but to manage them. When I manage my thoughts, I'm trying to deal with and handle them for my benefit. When you control something or someone, you attempt to regulate or rule them. Now, there are good things to control. Weeds in my garden, my car driving down the highway, and my language when I'm mad. My husband Bill thinks I should control my spending. The doctor wants me to control my cholesterol. My sister Sally asked me to control how many times I text her during the day. And those are all about controlling my own behavior. And I have to admit, they all make a pretty good point. What I'm focusing on is the tendency we all have to try to control the behavior, thoughts, and attitudes of other people. I'm focusing on the adults in your life, but I think there are real parallels for parents raising young children. What's the connection between control and self-care? I'll explain that by asking you to participate in a little activity or exercise. First, just take a few deep breaths. And if you're sitting down, just sit back and relax in your chair and just kind of relax and calm yourself down. Now, when you're ready, bring to mind the last argument you had, or disagreement, or tension spot. Just scan over the last 24 hours, the last day or so. When you bring that to mind, who was with you? Who was around you? When did it happen? And where were you? Try to put yourself back into that place. What was happening? Why were you having an argument, or what was the disagreement about? Now, how did you feel in that moment? Were you feeling anxious or angry? Maybe frustrated? Did tears come to your eyes, or did you want to just throw something or someone else? Well, I remember something that happened to me not too long ago. I was on a cruise with my sister Sally, and we had to take the COVID test before we could get on the ship. And as we got to the terminal, there were long, long lines. The room was full of people. And there didn't seem to be any of the cruise line staff around directing people. And as I looked at my watch, I noticed it was getting closer and closer to the time we're supposed to board. But there wasn't any direction. And my tension, my stress and anxiety just kept rising. I mean, I barked at my sister Sally. I was so frustrated I didn't know what to do. Well, eventually we got through the line and we got on the ship and we had a great cruise. But I'll tell you what, as soon as I got on that ship, you know what I did? I went right to the front desk and complained. I dumped all of my emotions right on the desk. I felt better at first, and then I felt worse. I was embarrassed, and by the time the whole ordeal was over, I was exhausted. I'm your mentor, and I lost control of myself. Now, that was a difficult situation. Was I taking care of myself then? Was my response in those moments me at my best self? Was that the self-care strategy that I want to use in the moment? I left that steward at the desk with a big self-care opportunity himself. Now, we all have our own version of some kind of cruise ship incident, but can't there be other options on how we're going to handle that situation? You may be familiar with Stephen Covey. He wrote the classic 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. And in that book, he describes a really helpful tool we can use to manage our emotions and our behavior when we're under stress. It's a great self-care tool. Covey distinguishes between people who focus on what they can do, what they can influence, versus people who focus their energy on things beyond their control. Picture 2 circles. The first is what we call our circle of concern. In any moment, we are concerned about something. In my case on the cruise, I was concerned about whether I would have a positive COVID test, what Sally's test result would be. We were running late. Would we miss the cruise? I was tired and hungry, and I was also concerned about all the other people behind us in line. Now, all those were real concerns. I'm not minimizing them, but there was very little I could do about them because they're outside of my control. I wasted time and energy I can't get back. The second circle is what Covey calls the circle of influence. Now picture in that moment for me, and in that moment for you, when you were in a disagreement or feeling tense or pressured, that circle of influence is really much smaller. It usually is. You see, influence is related to power. And waiting in that cruise terminal, I had no power over the cruise staff, the lines, the testing staff. It just was the way that it was. So in these tough situations, when we're feeling stressed and pressured about what's going on with ourselves or even with other people, here's the big question that you want to ask yourself. How can I take the best care of myself in this moment? And the key is to focus your energy and your attention on what you can influence. So, what could I influence in that moment? Well, looking back, I could let people know about a shorter line I found, and I could sit down instead of pacing back and forth, and I could put in my earbuds and listen to some music or an app I use that really helps me calm down. I actually did all of those, and while it didn't change anything that was going on outside of me, it did help me to calm down. As your mentor, my goal is to equip you with tools you can apply in the moment when you're feeling that stress and pressure. So, how can you practice self-care in those situations? Ask yourself these questions. First, what am I upset about? Name it. Giving words to it brings the reality into focus. It moves the emotion to something specific. In my case, I was feeling frustrated and upset, but about what? About the long lines, about time running out, about missing the ship. When I was able to focus on the circumstances rather than my emotions, then I could ask myself, what influence do I have over those circumstances? I have to admit, as I was thinking about that, I realized I have no influence over the lines. I have no influence on when the ship is going to leave. I have no influence on what Sally's test or my test is going to produce. So that leads to the next question. Now what? That might seem like an odd question, but what I love about it is it moves me into action I can take, or it brings me into awareness that most of what's happening, Jane, you can't do anything about. What you can do is sit down and relax. Now, you might be saying, Jane, I know I don't control the world. But let me ask you, if that's really true, Why do you still try to control circumstances and people as though you do? Why do you argue over politics, climate change, and gas prices? Why do you step in so often to save your kids from disappointment or even failure? Why are you holding back from giving tough feedback to one of your employees because you're afraid they'll fail? What about when you withhold sex from your husband because he isn't helping around the house? And what about that fight you had with your brother because he doesn't visit your parents as often as you think he should? Now, I said earlier that the best self-care tip I can offer is to let go of control. But you know what? There's something even better. When I find myself trying to take matters into my own hands when they don't belong there, I lose my peace, almost like a part of my self-respect. I'm also revealing a lack of confidence in God's ability or His willingness to accomplish His good purposes for me. You know, God's desire for us is to trust Him, to be in the driver's seat of our lives in both the big, the medium, and the small of circumstances. You know, I'm continuing to learn this. Stress and anxiety now, they don't have the power and control over me that they used to. I've discovered by asking myself those questions, I become more aware that God is in control. And in His grace and His strength, I can control my response to every disappointment and stress. So can you. And that's good self-care. So as we wrap up, what's your takeaway? I've offered some self-care tips about letting go of control. But what do you most want to remember? I'm your mentor, Jane. Join me next time to develop the mindset, skills, and habits that lead to your good life. Thank you for watching.